And welcome back. Now, as mentioned earlier in the news, the circumstances surrounding baby Daniel's death in that case at the hands of his mother and stepfather is one of the worst cases of child abuse to be heard in a South African court. And handing down judgment in the South Gauteng High Court yesterday, Judge Collen Mashitse said that the baby had been constantly abused during his short lifetime. Broken bones, severe bruises, head injuries, and 60% burns to his body. And this case has once again brought the plight of abused children to the forefront, where in just a week, this week, a newborn child was found in the mother's handbag in the Johannesburg CBD, and a 1-year-old was thrown out of a moving car. All of that happening just in a week. And Luke Lamprecht from Child Protection and Development, a Child Protection and Development Specialist, I should say, from Women and Men Against Child Abuse is with me here in our Joburg studio. And we're joined from Durban by Dumisile Nala, who is the National Executive Officer of Childline SA. To both of you, thanks so much for coming through.
Good morning.
Very sad that at what is supposed to be a festive time, for most at least, we are discussing this very, very tragic case. But let me just get your reaction to yesterday's judgment, starting with you, Luke.
Look, it was a bit of a pendulum yesterday. So the judgment handed down in terms of the stepfather was a landmark decision. You know, the fact that the judge found that the child had been murdered, so not culpable homicide or sole GBH, is a landmark decision, that there was an intention to kill the child. Even though the child was killed in installments, the intention was death. So that's a landmark decision. What's ironic on the other side of it is that the mother then gets convicted of a Schedule 1 offence of neglect. Now, for me, the mother was entirely negligent in the way that she kept her children in conditions that she knew were going to potentially be harmful to her child. And certainly, I believe, in the last instance, that she knew that the child would reasonably die. So it was a real pendulum decision.
And your view on this, Dumisile?
Yes, I think it was really difficult to listen to what was happening in court and the summary that was given in terms of how baby Daniel was abused over time. And I agree with Luke, it is quite significant that the stepfather was convicted as such. And also the mother, we can see that she failed to protect her child. And one would also think, how has she been able to protect other children in that environment? One, I suppose, would also understand that she probably was abused herself, and that probably impacted on her ability to look after her children.
So we have earned the unfortunate distinction of being a nation that doesn't care for its children. And this has been highlighted in several reports, the UN also picking up on this. Unfortunate distinction that we have as a nation, Luke, but why do we keep getting it wrong? Where is it falling apart?
You know, I think that ultimately the greatest problem we have is a total failure of family planning in this country. So if you conceive your child in your mind before you conceive your child in your body, and then when your child's in your body, you attach to the child, and then when the child is born, you know, you celebrate this child. I mean, this child's death wasn't even really mourned. You know, it was everybody trying to protect themselves, and they moved the funeral so that he couldn't attend. So, you know, I mean, the greatest tragedy is we should celebrate the birth of children and we should mourn their deaths. I mean, neither seems to have been done in this case. And I think that is the root of the failure of our ability to care for our children.
But with all the advocacy that people like yourselves do, with the laws that we have, you know, it seems as though our homes, behind closed doors, in the privacy of our homes, is where our children are most at risk. Would you agree with that sentiment, Dumisile?
Certainly, I agree with that. When we look at the cases we receive as Childline, we know that children are abused mainly within the home environment, by people that they trust or people who are supposed to protect them. So it is a big challenge because sometimes it's very difficult to reach what happens behind closed doors. But also, I think the failure exists with all of us as a society, because even though the child lives within a family home, there is someone other than the abuser who has contact with that child. The child would also go out into the community, and there are people who have contact with the child or children. And it's there that you think, how as a society then are we also failing to protect children?
But we also the society that's very set on, you know, our privacy, and people will literally turn away and say it's none of my business. So how do we change those attitudes, Luke? Because even in schools, when things happen to children at school, even though the law may be crystal clear in instances where, for example, an underage child falls pregnant, you still find teachers not obeying with the law and reporting these instances. You still find people at primary healthcare centers not reporting instances involving children that they should be reporting. So how do we change these attitudes?
Look, I think the first thing to understand is that in terms of sexual offences, everybody has an obligation to report. In terms of physical neglect, those kinds of cases, there's obviously a moral obligation to report, but on professionals there's a legal obligation. What is so dire in this particular baby Daniel's case is that you have a family that surrounded the children. So there's 4 children, by the way. So there's a family surrounding these children, and 2 of the people who were surrounding the children, which is the maternal and the paternal grandmothers, they were applying for custody of these children. So the people who raised the people who neglected and murdered the children are the people applying to look after the children, and the social work agency that was responsible and went out, and in 2 instances, went out to go and investigate, ignoring the doctor's findings that this was not an accidental injury. These social workers and police officers found that the child had not been abused and left the child there for the child to be killed. These are the people who are deciding the fate in the children's court of where the children go. So it's almost like, we always say it takes a village to raise children. It also takes a village to kill children, because everybody has a responsibility to stand up and say, we are here to protect. But even more than that, the biological family, so the nuclear family, grandparents, they should be protecting. And then the agencies that we report to, because we can only report to the police and social workers, they then find against the doctor's report that the children have not been abused, and then the child gets killed. We have to hold them accountable. So the only way I believe that we can actually now start making the village truly look after children is actually by holding them accountable, because it's not about privacy, it's about protection.
But how do we hold them accountable, given that there's usually this net where people would protect one another in these instances?
Okay, so what my opinion is, and the opinion of Women and Men Against Child Abuse, is that the enablers, the people that enable children being abused, including in this case the mother, and then the grandmother, and the other grandmother, and the social worker, and the police officers, we must actually charge them. So we actually have to make them as accountable as accomplices or as accessories after the fact to the abuse of children. And in this case, the torturous murder of a child over months.
Which raises the question as Childline, Tumisile. So when a child calls into Childline and they, for example, may report that they are being abused in whatever setting they may find themselves, what do you then do? What obligation is there on you as Childline?
So when we receive a call, be it from a child or a person who's concerned about a child, most importantly, we first have to ensure that the child is safe where they are. And then we gather as much information as we possibly can. And then we refer that child to the nearest resource. So it also depends what is the most urgent need. So we might refer the child to the nearest police station or to the social workers so that proper investigations can be conducted. Of course, by referring, I don't mean we will ask the child to go there, but we contact the necessary authorities and we give them all the details so that they can follow up on the child. And then from there, our job is to follow up and make sure that a service was provided to that child or contact was made to ensure that particular child is safe.
And what has been your experience in this regard? Do you find that the police, when you contact them, or social workers actually respond in a meaningful and timeous manner to your calls?
We have very mixed responses, and it is very difficult in some areas because children will phone from everywhere in the country, and we find that some agencies will respond urgently and quickly to support the child, and we do have cases where we've referred children over a long period of time and we fail to get feedback or a response as to what has happened if contact has been made. And in such instances, then we escalate matters to senior officials within those agencies, up to even their national departments if the need requires. But certainly we see that there is a challenge in terms of tracking children through the system and ensuring that they get the service they require and that feedback. So the referral and the feedback processes are a big challenge within the child protection system.
That is problematic, wouldn't you say, Luke? Because there has to be a consistent, even-handed response here.
So the one thing that we do know is that our laws are incredibly progressive. I mean, we have the most incredible laws probably in the world, and we've had to because we've got such a problem. But the investigations and the kind of interventions are almost entirely personality driven. It's based on who you get, it's based on who you know. And if there's no process in place, I mean, and these people wield enormous power. You must understand, like I said earlier, we can only report to police or social workers under the Act. And those police and social workers essentially are the gatekeepers to services. And if they make a decision, it's almost like they have godlike power. And in this instance, they made decisions that the children had not been abused without putting the case before the court, which for me is a real problem. So we need the courts to be more active, and we need to ensure that the children appear before court, because the doctor made a finding that the child had been injured non-accidentally. The social worker went and visited and said, well, the case is closed. There's nothing. Based on what? So it is completely personality driven, and they are not using the progressive laws that we have in the way that they should be in order to protect children.
So, with regard to that particular issue, as you outlined, with the finding by the doctor and then the social worker coming to a completely opposite determination, is there anything that can be done at this stage?
Well, we're certainly going to try, because if you think about the fact that, say, for example, we were called as medical people and we went out, and we found that the child was in need of care. We have no authority to remove children. We have no authority to arrest people. That's the police and social workers. So we can make a determination, but the people ultimately who are responsible for the protection of children under the law, our progressive laws, those are social workers and police officers, and they override everybody. So the problem with that is that we need to hold them accountable to say that if you are going to wield that kind of power, you need to be responsible for the power you wield. And should you get it wrong, we have the right to hold you accountable.
So it's one thing a child calls Childline and the system works effectively and children are removed from the situation of danger. But where do they go then? You know, are there facilities? Is the state sufficiently equipped to deal with these children who are abused once they are removed from the situation of danger? Let me start with you, Dumisile.
So what happens when the environment is seen to be abusive towards a child? An alternative place of care is sought. And I think as a country we have come to realize that putting children in an institution is not always to their best interest, because children need to live in an environment, in a family context, whatever that family setup is. So we certainly as Childline also encourage community-based care for the children. So government will work with other child welfare and other organizations to look at foster care placements within the communities. And we know, of course, that there are challenges with that as well. But also there are extended family members, albeit not as much as we used to see in the past, who are able to look after their families or their children. So that is also encouraged to look at who in the family unit is able to look after the child and provide safe and appropriate care for the child. But what is most important in that instance is to make sure that appropriate and proper assessments are conducted, including risks assessments, so that we ensure that we do not move a child from one abusive environment to the other. And once that has been done, ongoing care, support and follow-up by social workers is also crucial to provide support to the family so they are able to look after that young one in a manner that is proper.
I can't help but wonder, given Dumisile's earlier response, Luke, about, you know, how the service may be better in certain areas than others, sure, whether this also applies to indeed removing children and placing them in places of safety.
There's no doubt. I mean, you know, like I said, it's not only just personality driven, it's also sort of like location driven. So it depends on who you get. It's unfortunately not process, it's a lucky packet. But I want to make two comments in relation to what Dumisile said. The first thing is what I'm calling the myth of the benign granny. Just because you are an old lady who is like a gogo, you raised those children who killed that baby. Okay. Now, they look at family preservation and family reunification. Now they look at the grannies first because it's family. Family is not, in my opinion, a genetic concept. It's not a biological concept. It's a psychological concept. It's about attachment and care. It's about the fact that I love this child and I want this child. Where were those grandmothers when this child was being killed? Now, the social work agency, under the guise of family preservation and reunification, are saying we want to place the children with these grannies and give the grannies visitation. These grannies were the people who raised the murderers. I mean, if you want to adopt a child, there's a massive screening process for you to adopt a child. But if you are a, what we call kinship care, if you are related, all of a sudden you just by default are okay to have the children. I don't buy it. And I think that we're making really serious errors in terms of the placements. And what Dumisile is saying in terms of the assessment, the support, the ongoing care is really, really important, because the children that are left behind after baby Daniel, those children are still at risk.
And I just want to hear from both of you in closing, you know, starting with you, Dumisile. So where to from here? What will be your actions? Where do you think the state needs to beef up, and what should happen next? Starting with you.
I think this case really has pointed us to the steps we need to take as the country. I think professionals that are involved in children's lives have to be held accountable. And we do have examples from other countries where investigations do take place after each and every death of a child, so that we can understand how the system fails the child, but also how do we improve to make sure that such circumstances do not happen again. So I think it is very important in this instance. Looking at this particular case, we also have to think about the other children in the family and look at, are they safe? Is the family unit able to care and protect them and ensure that we do the necessary work to ensure their safety and care? And really to plead to the communities at large and the society that it's not good enough to look after your own. We have the responsibility to look after all the children in our country and take the necessary steps and action and report. Yes, the system might fail at times, but we still need to push on and report and hold those people we report to accountable to ensure the safety of children.
Luke?
I think I just want to echo what Dumisile said. I think the doctors in this case did a good job. You know, we often complain about doctors not wanting to testify. The doctors did a fantastic job. They reported to the police and to the social workers like they should have. They went and visited, and they made a determination against medical evidence. Based on what? So my question is, what kind of training what kind of risk assessment, who is overseeing them, how did they make that determination that led to them leaving a child there to be tortured and killed. And they placed that child, you must remember as a system, when we intervene, we place the children at additional risk because now he knows there are people coming to look. And that, as we know in domestic violence cases, when women are trying to get out, that's when they get killed most. So we pose a risk to children by intervening. We must do it properly.
Well, thank you so much to Dumisile Ndala from Childline, as well as Luke Lamprecht from Women and Men Against Child Abuse, for talking to us about the state of child abuse in South Africa. And just a reminder there of our question of the day. We asked you, as South Africa, we have some of the most unprotected children in the world.